Last night, Minneapolis voters shut down a ballot initiative that would have replaced their police department with a Department of Public Safety. The initiative also would have wiped all language about the MPD from the city charter, including its minimum funding requirement, and moved some control over public safety away from the MPD and the mayor and given it to the city council.
The rejection of calls to defund the police at ground zero of last year's social uprising against police brutality is a major blow to abolitionists who struggled to keep the movement from losing steam amidst reports of rising violent crime. A September poll from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune and PBS revealed 75% of voters believed violent crime was increasing in the city, and 55% said shrinking the police force would lead to negative consequences. Among black voters in Minneapolis, only 13% said reducing the number of police would be beneficial, compared with 21% of white voters. Here to give their reactions to the ruling is Team Rising. Max Alvarez is editor-in-chief at The Real News and host of the Working People podcast. And Patrice Onwuka is a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Good morning.
And so, Max, if depending on how you count, the civil rights backlash in the 1960s took, say 4 years, 3-4 years, but depending on when you date the launch of the movement, longer than that to form and to kind of snap. It seems like the backlash in the United States this time around came much quicker. Is that just a function of everything moving faster in today's politics, or is something else going on, or are we not actually yet at backlash territory and there's still much more to come?
I kind of feel like yes to all of the above, right? So we are in the midst of backlash. I also think that the worst is very much yet to come. But I think you're absolutely right, Ryan, to kind of point to the long view and think about this in a larger historical perspective, right? I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's obviously a huge defeat, especially when you consider that in the summer of 2020, we had the largest mass uprising in this country's history, filled with people demanding change to the police system in this country. And then basically 1 year later, with an actual spike in murder rates that no one really has a good answer to where it came from, because it's very complicated. But the media did its job of kind of really scaring the shit out of people about this. We doubled down on the only solution that we've ever known, which is to kind of have more police. And I don't necessarily blame people for that, because that's just how people work, right? I mean, think back to the 2020 presidential election. A lot of people in the Democratic Party, or a lot of potential Democratic voters, were very interested in what Bernie Sanders was talking about. Then the pandemic hit and everyone got really freaked out, and Trump's popularity was rising. So we got more conservative and we said, we just need to get Biden in office. We can think about big change later. It's kind of similar thing happened here, right? I mean, people were understandably outraged by everything that they were seeing that the police are doing, their brutalization of black and brown communities, right? I mean, this is all very well known. And murder rates did spike. It is the largest kind of increase in a single year that we have seen, even though the murder rates are still far below what they were in the early 90s and the 70s and the 80s. But people are going to be understandably scared about that. And we have no real conception of how to handle that other than increased funding for police. And so, unfortunately, it kind of fizzled out. But I think the very fact that 43% of voters were actually in favor of this is a pretty significant marker for kind of changing in attitudes in a country where the police have largely gone unquestioned and for pretty much my entire lifetime.
Yeah, Patrice, there was a lot of sort of bipartisan interest in criminal justice reform, interest in changing some aspects of policing, a lot of cross-partisan concerns about the police that I feel like got subjugated to then when it became about defunding the police and sort of the explicitly racial lens, or the problem with police is that it's racism, and that's the main problem, and don't look too closely at the numbers, that kind of thing. Do you think that has harmed the kind of movement for criminal justice reform, where now it's just like, well, the left is all about defunding the police, so the right's gotta take the side of the police?
Well, no. I mean, when I look at the First Step Act, which is probably the closest and best police or criminal justice reform federal effort we'll see, maybe potentially in the next couple of years, it was really focused on recidivism, on ensuring that those who served their time and got out were able to reestablish themselves in society, particularly through work. There was also the idea about mandatory sentencing and how we can ensure that, frankly, the punishment fits the crime. And I think a lot of conservatives recognize that we do want to welcome those who are nonviolent back into society and give them that second shot. So on that side of criminal justice reform, I don't think that that's going to end. I do think that that will continue. But the larger police reform conversation, that is on hold. It's on ice. We saw Senator Tim Scott trying his best to work across the aisle on a police reform bill. What's been held hostage is, frankly, the purists who want defunding more than they want bipartisan common sense reforms. That is actually where the American people want to be. They believe that there is a problem in policing. They believe that there's a lack of accountability for those police officers who actually do abuse their powers. And they're looking for some, commonplace, common sense reforms that are possible, but they're not going to happen when you have politicians who are such purists, so committed and wedded to eliminating policing as we know it, that's never going to happen. And let me just say about last night, there were 2 winners and 2 losers. The winners are the people who, recognize that public safety, they don't want politicians to experiment with their public safety by getting rid of policing. And frankly, the Minnesota police chief, Arando, who said, listen, I would take some ideas, but I have seen nothing when it comes to this effort. The losers are those politicians who have been pushing for defunding the police at the federal and local level, and the criminals who couldn't wait for their police officers to be removed from the streets.
So, Max, in Austin, there was a victory in the sense that the right had come with a kind of refund the police, I guess you would call it, initiative where they were going to try to push a ton more money toward the police department. That was beaten back. So my question, where do you see this movement going from here? And to dovetail off what Robbie was saying, that there's actually not a racial lens through which this can be viewed statistically, but that's not the case exactly. I mean, I think a black person in this country is still about twice as likely to be shot by police than a white person in this country. Policing is disproportionately much rougher, and the statistics are very clear on this, on black people than it is on white people. The numbers have been coming down, partly thanks to Black Lives Matter, starting in 2013. But
that's right. No, I agree with that. That's right. There are racial problems in policing, but it's been cast as like that is the only issue in policing, and it's only the only victims are. It's all because of race, and all the victims are because of race.
Right. As like I've said before,
and when you get in the nitty-gritties of the shooting, it's not. There is a discrepancy, but it's not as.
Right.
It's not the way people.
So Max, where does the movement go from here?
So here's, I guess, like the sad reality of the situation is we're going to be back here again. I'm usually, very averse to giving any sort of political predictions because the past 10 years in our politics have humbled me from doing so, whether that be the Trump becoming president or COVID-19, trying to predict the future is a fool's errand. But what I can safely say is that we will be back here again because we are essentially doing the same thing that we've always done, which has created the same problems that we've always had, right? This is the kind of magical power of the American policing system to basically always fail upwards, right? When crime goes up, we pump more money into the police. When crime goes down, we think that that's because of the police and we give them more money because they must be doing something right, so we should fund it more. When cops are shown to be horrifically abusing their power, we give them more money for training and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that police don't really, essentially prevent or even fight crime. They respond to it, right? The correlation of number of crimes and funding for police is less telling than like the correlation between crime and extreme inequality in this country, right? So we know that dumping more money into police is not going to eliminate crime in a horribly unequal society that has ripped kind of all meaning and ability for working people to sustain themselves and provide so few kind of opportunities for people to make comfortable, dignified, sustainable lives. You're always going to kind of have more crime in that sort of scenario. And that is the kind of situation that we refuse to address. All we essentially do is double down on expanding the police force to deal with the inevitable problems and pains that come from having such an unjust and unequal society.
Yeah. Yep. Max and Patrice, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your analysis this morning.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.